So I've noticed a pattern that everyone likes to talk about what to eat pre-workout. And that's cool. Like, we all need to know the right kind of fuel for our bodies. But I have yet to see something that explains what not to eat before a workout. And maybe it's dwelling on a negative a little bit, but I think it's important to focus on what you shouldn't eat or what you should abstain from, because it can ultimately affect your workout. Now, we have to look at something very obvious that a lot of us overlook when it comes to our workouts. You see, we're always looking for that metabolic fuel. We're like, how can we get more glucose? How can we get more energy? How can we get more glycogen? How can we make our workout better this way? But we're not looking at the big picture, mechanically speaking. You see, it takes a lot of energy to digest food. It takes a lot of blood flow to break down nutrients, to actually mechanically digest. And when we work out, we are diverting so much of the blood from our organs out to our lungs, to our heart, to our extremities so that we can actually exercise. In fact, 80% of the blood flow that goes to the organs involved in digestion is actually decreased. So we are really working with a minimal amount of blood flow to begin with. Now, what this can lead to, just to give you an extreme example, so it puts it all in perspective. If you have minimal blood flow and your body is working really hard on digesting while you are exercising, what is going to happen is it can make it so you have inflammation in the intestinal tract. That inflammation can cause intestinal permeability. That intestinal permeability can make it so larger food molecules actually get into the bloodstream. And this can cause something called exercise-induced anaphylaxis. Basically an allergic response, because lymphocytes are firing at the food particles trying to trigger an immune response. This causes some permanent damage to the gut, and it can also, of course, cause that allergic response. Again, that's an extreme case, but it shows you what happens when you're trying to digest food while your body is working hard. Now, what prompted me to do this video, because it's really kind of random, is a research journal that I read not that long ago. And this took Ironman athletes, or actually half Ironman athletes. It took 55 of them, and they measured some things before and after the race. What they looked at is how they felt after the race. 52% of the Ironman triathletes, after they finished their triathlon, claimed that they felt nauseous, they felt sick, they felt queasy. Well, what they looked at is what those people ate prior to the workout. So what we ended up finding out is that the people that didn't have nausea were people that drank something called a hypotonic beverage or an isotonic beverage. And I'm going to explain in more detail what that is. But basically, everyone that ate food ended up feeling queasy after the race. Now, that's not the end-all be-all. This is just one study, but it's still pretty interesting. Now, let me explain what the people that didn't feel nauseous consumed. So first, we have to look at three different things. We have to look at something called a hypertonic beverage, a hypotonic beverage, and an isotonic beverage. And all this is different fancy names for talking about the sugar to water ratio, basically. So a hypertonic drink is something that has more than 8 grams of sugar per 100 milliliters of water. Now, what's going to happen with that is it's going to have a higher osmotic pressure than bodily fluid, which means that it's going to have a hard time absorbing. It's going to absorb slower than the rate of water in the body. So if you can imagine that, you're left with like a syrup. You're left with undigested particles while the body is extracting the water. That can make you feel nauseous. Now, a hypotonic drink is something that has less than 4 grams of sugar per 100 grams of water. That has a lower osmotic pressure than bodily fluid, which means that it absorbs relatively quick, sometimes even faster than water. Now, an isotonic beverage is something that has between 4 grams and 8 grams of sugar per 100 milliliters. It has about an equal osmotic pressure to bodily fluid, which means it's absorbed at about or slightly faster than the same rate as water. So what this tells us is that those that consumed iso or hypotonic drinks didn't get nauseous. So basically, if the food or the liquid they consumed was able to naturally work with the bodily fluid and not actually require mechanical digestion, surprisingly, they didn't get nauseous. So that's how it all comes down to it. Now, that's just talking about endurance athletes. Let's cross the board a little bit and talk about strength training. Okay, so again, the same kind of thing applies. Why do you want all this blood flow to be in your gut? You know, especially in weight training, we're trying to get the maximal amount of blood flow to a muscle, trying to get that nutrient delivery. But contrary to popular belief and what a lot of people say is generally your body is running on glycogen. It's running on already stored carbohydrates. It's not running on the immediate fuel that you gave it just 30 minutes ago. It is more apt to be running on stored fuel versus running on something you just consumed. But let's get down to the nitty-gritty of it. What shouldn't you consume? Basically, you should avoid trans fats. Trans fats require an additional level of digestion because the body doesn't quite understand what they are. It takes a lot more processes, it takes a lot more enzymes to break them down because they're hydrogenated, they're not even really natural. The body is still trying to adapt on how to break them down. Another one we have to look at are going to be our precious omega-3s. And I'm huge on omega-3s. But if you're consuming them too close to the workout, you're not going to absorb them. And they requires a certain level of mechanical digestion. Now, the same thing applies for fruits and veggies. Those are hard to break down. If you are going to have some fruits, you want to have them about an hour before so that you have them in your bloodstream, you're not having to deal with the mechanical digestion. But just know that you may not use that fruit for fuel during your workout. It may or may not be actually utilized as energy. That's the basic rule. If you're going to consume fat, consume it an hour beforehand. If you're going to consume protein, do something that's fast absorbing like whey or pea protein. Try not to eat meat unless it's about 45 minutes to an hour beforehand. And at the best case scenario, try to find an isotonic or a hypotonic drink that gives you just enough carbohydrates to replenish a little bit of glycogen, gives you just enough in the way of electrolytes, but doesn't require a lot of digestion. As always, keep it locked in here on my videos. See you in the next one.